Until midway through the 19th century, the term anarchism, from the Greek anarche, meaning absence of power, was a negative term used to designate disorder and chaos. But while major figures like Sade, Babeuf, or Godwin had been dubbed anarchists, it was Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, one of the few thinkers with a working-class background, who used it to define a revolutionary political stance, and in doing so, invested the term with a positive value. In 1840, Proudhon wrote the memoir for which he is famous, What is Property? While the answer he offered to the question, property is theft, immediately caused a scandal, it was in the Declaration of Faith, a few lines later, that the true birth of anarchist thought could be found. It is a paradox that says it all.
Well, you're a Democrat? No. What? You would have a monarchy? God forbid. Then you're an aristocrat? Not at all. You want a mixed government? Still less. Then what are you? I am an anarchist. Although a firm friend of order, I am, in the full force of the term, an anarchist.
While Proudhon advocated the destruction of power in order to change the social structure, he denounced revolutionary violence. His vision was for a mutual system underpinned by his People's Bank. His thinking, though, came under attack from all sides. He was criticized, lampooned, and outlawed. But his writings traveled, and his anarchism appealed to socialists all over the world, such as a young doctor in philosophy named Karl Marx, who proclaimed them to be the harbinger of the new European workers' movement. And even further afield, on the outskirts of Europe, in distant Russia, Count Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy borrowed the title of a Proudhon essay for his new book, War and Peace. But it was with Mikhail Bakunin, a former cadet who went through every prison in Europe and was several times sentenced to death, that anarchism would become revolutionary thinking in the strictest sense. Bakunin began to spread anarchist ideas within the new International Association of Workers, better known as the First International. This association, set up in 1864 in London, established that the emancipation of the workers must be the work of the workers themselves, and gathered at its launch more than 2,000 workers, sweepers, laborers, gilders, carpenters, and joiners from all over the world. It was, in the eyes of the Russian revolutionaries, an ideal instrument for honing the anarchist project and presenting it to the world. But after the death of Proudhon, between Bakunin, the heir apparent to the mantle, father of anarchism, and Marx, who had long since split with the author of The Philosophy of Poverty, the debate went downhill. Their quarrel, as much personal as it was political, soon divided the socialist movement. Three major movements emerged: a somewhat minority reformist movement that dismissed the virtues of revolution, a Marxist movement qualified by the anarchists as authoritarian, which believed that an order would be established through the dictatorship of the proletariat, and finally, Bakunin's anti-authoritarian or anarchist movement, which advocated insurrection and final destruction of all state apparatus. Standing almost 2 meters tall and with his clear blue eyes, Bakunin, who spoke 5 languages, soon won over influential members of the International, such as the Swiss James Guillaume, the French Élie-Élisée Reclus, the Spaniard Anselmo Lorenzo, the Italian Malatesta, and a little later the Russian Prince Kropotkin. Thanks to them, anarchism became an international movement and the most popular revolutionary ideology among the various socialist currents. With followers of Bakunin and Proudhon now in the majority within the International, many of their disciples could be found in France too. When the Paris Commune broke out in 1871, the anarchists were in the forefront. And along with the other revolutionaries, they threw themselves wholeheartedly into the insurrection. 73 days, Paris rose up, shot a few generals, burned land registers, toppled the old idols, and returned power to the people. On the ruins of the old order, the revolutionaries within the International set aside divisions and together tried to build a better world. Everyone was supplied according to their needs. The poor were fed, the illiterate taught to read and write, and the disabled cared for. Church and state were separated. The arts became accessible to all. Women were given an education, the vote, and control over their bodies, and the city worked almost without any government. The Paris Commune may not have been anarchist, but those who proclaimed themselves to be anarchists, or those who soon would, such as Louis Michel, were in the front line. And when the movement spread to French cities such as Lyon, Bakunin himself took part in the insurrection. Within a few days, the state had been abolished. He believed the grand soir had finally arrived. But the government was already striking back. The communards raised the barricades and prepared for battle. In the course of a long week, in Haussmann's Paris, a civil war broke out in which workers, men, women, and children were pitched against a trained army. The ensuing counter-revolutionary backlash reflected the fear that the Commune had struck into the hearts of the bourgeoisie. The troops fired indiscriminately. The pride of the proletariat was cut down as Paris became a mass grave. Many anarchists died in the bloodshed, while many others were banished to the Caledonian penal colonies. The few, to avoid death or the wrath of the state, were condemned to exile and misery. With their numbers diminished, the Marxists seized the movement to expel anarchists from the International. But anarchism survived. Bakunin managed to flee in disguise. He gathered his last forces in his Saint-Imier stronghold in Switzerland in the Jura Mountains, sealing an alliance that would herald the official birth of his movement.